Meta just broke ground on the biggest data center it has ever built outside the United States. Not in Texas, not in Virginia, in Sturgeon County, Alberta, 35 kilometers northeast of Edmonton, 1 gigawatt, 13 billion Canadian dollars, and it will run physically on natural gas. I went through the utility filings, the tolling structure, and the legislation Alberta wrote to make this deal happen. Here's my verdict up front, and it's a split decision. The deal itself? A bridge. Gas to power AI now, with clean power promised for later. And honestly, it's the cleanest, fastest, most bankable firm power structure anyone has signed in the AI boom. The green label stapled to it, 100% matched with clean and renewable energy. That one doesn't survive contact with a gas turbine. Today I'll show you both halves, the deal anatomy nobody in the news coverage has actually read, the law Alberta wrote to make it happen, the violent physics of AI power that batteries are quietly being drafted to solve, and the carbon regulation that had to disappear 6 weeks before anyone signed for this whole thing to pencil. This is bankable. Let's open the books. Start with what Meta actually bought. A 1 gigawatt AI-optimized campus in Sturgeon County, Alberta. Meta's 33rd data center, its first in Canada, and its largest anywhere outside the US. 13 billion Canadian, call it 9 billion US, plus 60 million for local roads and water. Construction takes 2 to 3 years, 3,000 workers at the peak. Once it's running, about 300 permanent jobs. Do that math. $13 billion, 300 jobs, roughly $43 million of capital per permanent position. Data centers are capital, not payroll. What Alberta is actually buying here is power infrastructure and tax base. Keep that straight, and the rest of the deal makes sense. 1 gigawatt is not an abstraction. This single campus will draw about 3/4 as much electricity as the entire city of Edmonton. The cooling is closed loop and dry, essentially no operating water, which neutralizes the usual first objection to desert and prairie data centers. But a gigawatt of demand needs a gigawatt of supply, and this is where Alberta stopped looking like everywhere else. Everywhere else in North America, AI data centers are fighting the grid. In PJM territory, the interconnection queue runs 4 to 7 years. In Louisiana, Meta's other mega campus triggered a ratepayer war that's still in front of regulators. Manitoba, Hamilton, Michigan, Georgia. Jurisdictions are pausing data centers outright, scared of what they do to power bills. Alberta ran the opposite direction, and it did it with a machine, not a slogan. Watch the sequence. Late 2024, the province publishes an AI data center strategy and starts openly recruiting hyperscalers. June 2025, the grid operator, AESO, gets flooded. 29 projects asking for 16 gigawatts of connections against a provincial peak load of about 12. The queue is now 42 projects wanting 21 gigawatts, nearly 2 Alberta's worth of demand waiting for a plug. So AESO caps it, 1,200 megawatts of near-term grid access total. Everyone else waits. And here's the detail I love, because it tells you what scarcity does. Those allocations became property. During a sanctioned transfer window, one company sold its 180 megawatt slot for $18 million. Grid access in Alberta now has a market price, roughly $100,000 per megawatt just for the right to plug in. December 2025, the legislature passes Bill 8. If you want power beyond the cap, bring your own generation. And they wired the incentive straight into the tax code. A grid-connected data center pays a 2% levy on its computer hardware. Bring your own generation, stay grid-connected. 1%, go fully off grid, 0. That's not policy language. That's a price signal you can read from orbit. So, Meta's announcement in July wasn't a beginning. It was the finish line of a 2-year assembly line. Announcement to first electrons, about 2 years. The same trip in PJM is 5 to 7. That's the product Alberta is selling, speed. And Meta is the anchor customer. Now the part almost nobody covers, And honestly, my favorite section, because it's where the electrical engineering lives. Everyone knows AI load is big. The underrated problem is that it's violent. When you train a frontier model, tens of thousands of GPUs start and stop compute phases in lockstep. The whole building breathes in sync. Tesla's engineering numbers put the swings at up to 90% of load, oscillating at up to 30 Hz, not 30 times an hour, 30 times a second. Grids hate this. It's the profile of a giant arc furnace that never clocks out. And here's the anecdote that makes it real. Meta's own engineers, training Llama, built a software flag, literally named PyTorch No Power Plant Blowup, that burns dummy computations during training gaps just to keep the power draw flat. Fake work to protect real turbines. At gigawatt scale, that wasted energy costs tens of millions a year. The company that named the problem is now building a gigawatt of it north of Edmonton. Alberta's grid operator saw this coming. On June 12, 26 days before Meta's announcement, AESO published connection requirements for what it calls, beautifully, non-conforming loads, steep ramps, load intermittency, oscillation. And it signaled a hard expectation. Data centers may be required to limit their ramp rate at the connection point to roughly 10 megawatts per minute. For a 1 gigawatt campus, that's a speed limit. Your building can breathe, but slowly. So how does a data center comply while its GPUs do whatever the training run demands? You put a shock absorber between the chips and the grid. This is exactly what xAI did in Memphis. 168 Tesla megapacks, over 650 megawatt hours, soaking up the swings. Battery systems respond in milliseconds, faster than any turbine governor, and Tesla claims better than 70% reduction in swing amplitude. And in Alberta, watch who's positioned. Capital Power. The utility that signed Meta's bridge supply contract is developing its own data center campus at its Genesee plant, and its pitch says the quiet part out loud: battery investment can unlock 500 megawatts of near-term capacity for data centers. Batteries aren't just backup anymore. They're how you manufacture grid headroom without building a new plant, and how a violent load passes its driving test with the system operator. Nothing public yet confirms batteries inside Meta's fence here. Watch the utility filings. But the architecture is set. A tolled gas plant for bulk power, a utility fleet for firming, and batteries emerging as the compliance layer in between. On firmness, this stack is as strong as anything in AI right now, fully dispatchable, no weather dependence, and a rulebook that forces the load itself to behave. Now follow the money, because the structure here is genuinely elegant. Meta's power comes in layers. Layer 1, the bridge, a 250 megawatt supply agreement with Capital Power, more than 10 years, served from plants that already exist. That's what energizes the first phase in the back half of 2028. Layer 2, the anchor, a brand new 932 megawatt combined cycle gas plant next door, the Greenlight Electricity Center, $4.6 billion, online around 2030. And here's the key: Meta doesn't own that plant. A pipeline company, Pembina, owns 47.5%. Meta signed what's called a tolling agreement. It rents the plant's output long-term, the way a shipper rents pipeline capacity. Pembina's CEO said it in one line: "This is our proven midstream model, applied to power." Take or pay economics for electrons. Think about what that allocates. Construction risk, cost overruns. Those live with the owners and their 60% project debt. Volume risk. That's Meta's, paying for capacity whether it runs or not. And Meta's double. A credit rating is what makes the whole thing financeable at scale. Everyone holds the risk they're best built to carry. That is what a clean deal looks like. The fuel math is the unfair advantage. Alberta gas trades around $1.90 a gigajoule, among the cheapest molecules in North America, roughly a third of US benchmark prices, because this basin has more supply than exits. Run that through a modern combined cycle plant and fuel costs. You may be $13 to $15 a megawatt hour. The gas producers get a new customer, burning 150 million cubic feet a day. The data center gets fuel almost too cheap to meter. That's the marriage this deal formalizes. But, and this is the number that should reset your priors, the plant itself is not cheap. $4.6 billion for 932 megawatts is about $4,900 per kilowatt. 5 years ago, a combined cycle plant cost a third of that. The global gas turbine shortage has repriced cheap gas power everywhere. Cheap fuel now comes wrapped in expensive steel. Remember that every time someone says gas is the easy answer, then there's the claim that made headlines. Everyone else's bill goes down. Meta pays about $100 million a year in transmission charges, plus full freight for grid upgrades. Bill 8 makes cost causation the law. The province says spreading fixed costs over a bigger base should cut the transmission line item on household bills by about 6%. I'll be straight with you, that's the government's number, and the tariff math behind it deserves an independent audit. Gas exposure and pool price effects cut the other way, as the critics correctly note. But contrast the direction with Louisiana, where Meta's plants landed on the regulated utilities books and customer bills are already up double digits. Alberta at least wrote the rule, so the anchor tenant pays the freight. Structurally, that's the honest version of this trade. Which brings us to the label. Meta's announcement says the data center's electricity use will be matched with 100% clean and renewable energy. Read that sentence next to the physical facts. A brand new gas plant running around the clock on a grid that is about 60% gas, fired with a carbon intensity roughly 5 times the Canadian average. Matched is doing heroic work in that sentence. It means renewable energy certificates. For every megawatt hour the campus consumes, Meta contracts a megawatt hour of renewable generation somewhere, sometime. It is not the electrons in the building, and it is not clean power at 3 a.m. when the GPUs are training and the gas turbines are what's spinning. Now, to be fair to Meta, their matching playbook is more honest than most. They build new wind and solar. They don't just buy paper, and corporate buyers signed 3.3 gigawatts of renewable deals in Alberta between 2019 and 2025. Microsoft and Amazon both did it here. The machine exists. Except, Alberta froze it. A 7-month moratorium on renewable approvals, then new siting rules, and by 2025, new renewable construction had collapsed to its lowest level since 2018. Even TD Bank's economists, not exactly an environmental lobby, published a paper politely pointing out that the province is recruiting gigawatt loads while strangling the supply that could match them. The Pembina Institute put it more bluntly, Alberta and Meta agreed to lock in gas today and build renewables later. And the grid operators bring your own generation intake? Currently gas plants only. And then there's the part of the story that nobody connected, and it's the part I think matters most. A federal regulation, the Clean Electricity Regulations, would have forced any new gas plant to hit a near zero emission standard by 2035. For a plant entering service in 2030, that's a 5-year cliff. No investment committee on earth puts $4.6 billion into that. Last November, Ottawa and Alberta signed a memorandum that suspended those regulations in Alberta, effective immediately, while a court decides whether they're even constitutional. The same memorandum committed Alberta to deliver a data center investment framework by July 1st of this year. And the price of the truce? Alberta's industrial carbon price, frozen at $95 a ton, now ramps to just $130 by 2040. Meanwhile, Alberta's own benchmark for power plants is a good as best gas standard, which means a brand new, best-in-class gas plant pays carbon costs on almost nothing. Now read the calendar with me. Memorandum November, Bill 8 December, Carbon Pricing Agreement April, Implementation Agreement May, Greenlight's plant approval June 25th, Final Investment Decision July 2nd, Meta's groundbreaking July 8th. I'm not alleging anything. I'm reading a calendar. The carbon cliff was removed, the welcome mat was legislated, and only then did the capital commit. The plant advertises carbon capture optionality, and the site is permitted for double the capacity. Optionality is exactly what it sounds like, an option, not a promise. This bridge has no legislated far bank. So put the whole board up. Meta Sturgeon County, 1 gigawatt, 13 billion. Greenlight, 932 megawatts tolled, 4.6 billion, permitted to 1864. Capital Power, 250 megawatts, 10 plus years, first power, 2028. An $18 million secondary market in grid slots. Behind it, Meta's U.S. pattern, 10 gas plants totaling more than 7 gigawatts underway with one utility in Louisiana, 3 behind-the-meter gas projects in Ohio, and behind that, 37 more projects in Alberta's queue, 21 gigawatts, waiting for Phase 2 rules that don't exist yet. The scorecard, then, out of 10. Speed to power, 9. 2 years to first electrons is the whole sales pitch. Firmness, a perfect 10. Dispatchable around the clock, with the ramp rulebook to police the load itself. Economics, 8. Fuel is a gift, the structure is clean, but the steel costs triple what it used to. Scalability, 8. The site doubles, the playbook exports, the queue is deep. 4. The intent to match is real, and Meta's track record on additionality is better than most. But new unabated gas, locked for 30 years, under a suspended clean grid rule wearing a renewable label, is not what the sticker says. Verdict. And it's the split I opened with. The deal, a bridge, and I mean that as a compliment. If AI demand is real and immediate, this is the most honest way anyone has powered it. New supply, full cost, causation, risk parked with the parties built to hold it, and a province that turns speed itself into an export product. The label, greenwash, not fraud, accounting. But accounting that lets a gas-fired gigawatt wear a renewable badge while the rules that would have forced it clean were quietly set aside. Both things are true at once, and if you only hold one of them, you don't understand this deal. What would change my mind? Watch 3 things. If Meta signs new build, Alberta wind and solar at real scale, the label starts earning itself. If carbon capture goes from optionality to a funded scope, the far bank appears. And if the AI capex cycle cracks, and there are already people asking whether this much compute has customers, Alberta owns a very large, very well-financed gas plant with one anchor tenant. Watch the filings, not the press releases. If this kind of deal anatomy is useful to you, the full research file, every number, every source, is at bankable.show. Tell me in the comments, would you have taken Alberta's trade? Fast power now, carbon questions later? I read every reply, and the best argument gets pinned. More deals like this one are coming to the series. Subscribe so you don't miss the next teardown. Nothing in this episode is investment advice. It's due diligence done out loud. See you on the next one.